Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at BTV World, of course, with Farrukh, Pitafi and Faisal accompanying me in the show. We are going to be taking a look at the current political dynamics, of course, with the new caretaker prime minister being sworn in. It's important now to take a look at what this caretaker setup is going to be like, which now poses, of course, big question marks as to what lies ahead. The first task that is extremely important is to be choosing the cabinet. But we've also seen that in the maiden meeting that was chaired by the caretaker prime minister, he took the economic situation and took that as the priority, and then moved forward with taking up this uphill task and to try and understand what is really going on, and has asked for an assessment of the structures and the reforms of various sectors and what sort of areas are then aligned accordingly. He also, of course, had the meeting with senior officials from the finance and power divisions, from the FBR, from the, of course, State Bank of Pakistan, and many others who were involved in this particular meeting. And the focus, of course, was the kind of economic challenges the country is facing, in particular, of course, the standby arrangement with the IMF, a review of which will definitely come under the caretaker setup, and expectedly perhaps the third review as well. And this is important, especially now, given the extended time period that this caretaker setup will likely be in place, given the fact that the CCI has ratified the new census results, and now the delimitations process is going to take further time. So we're going to try and understand exactly what sort of economic challenges that poses to particularly the IMF deal, and then, of course, in the way that the reforms are important both in the tax revenue department, which of course was one of the focuses of the meeting today, and then, of course, the way of establishing continuity of previous policies and making sure that as we move forward we are going in the right direction. And that, of course, will also bring us back to the issue of who exactly will be part of the cabinet. This is going to be an important decision as we look ahead, and so we're going to try and understand where exactly the particular policies are going to be heading, and what sort of powers then, of course, are also there, and the authority that exists with the caretaker setup, so that certain decisions can be taken. That is going to be the focus of our first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to be taking a look back at the 77 years of the kind of human rights violations and brutalities we've unfortunately seen unfold both within India and also part of the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this is important also now, given the fact that there is a lot of discussion that has been highlighted previously as well, both by Pakistan and internationally as well, given the kind of propaganda campaign, then there the kind of crackdown that exists on dissenting voices, and how particularly under the BJP regime we've seen numerous policies taken which of course have impacted the lives of minorities, especially Muslims within India. So we're going to be taking a look back at that, and then, of course, talking about what needs to be done ahead, and what sort of an action plan needs to exist for the future to be brighter than it is today. So that is going to be our discussion at the end of the show. Of course, Farrukh and Faisal are going to be part of the discussion. We've also been joined for our first segment online by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, who's a senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan, for being part of the show. It's a pleasure to have you on the show as always. And let me start with you, given the fact that we've spoken at length, of course, about the economic challenges the country is facing. And now we're at that point where we have a caretaker setup in place. And especially when we take a look at this from the angle of the standby arrangement in place with the IMF, it becomes extremely important then to understand the huge task and responsibility that exists on the shoulders of the caretaker setup. And I want to understand exactly how you think the particular issues with regards to the reviews of the standby arrangement are going to be impacted by the fact that now the caretaker setup will be longer than previously expected, and so it's going to be in place for far longer than before. What exactly do you think is going to be the effect of that on the standby arrangement?
Sana, good to see all of you three, and always good to be with you guys. So, Sana, I mean, it's a very somber time for Pakistan. We are just coming in the 76th year of our history. And, you know, I will be saying that Pakistan's IMF program is critical to Pakistan's stability. That's not a great thing to say, but that's the truth. 23rd program. This is a longer caretaker. This is a caretaker which is given more empowerment and thus more responsibility. This is one of the few caretakers who have to complete a standby arrangement. Now almost complete the arrangement. Sana, if they were to go in November as we had predicted earlier, the first review would be falling sometime in November, And I was uncertain whether the IMF would have done it with them or with the incoming folks. But now one is very clear that the first review, and maybe kind of in February, let's see what happens. But at least the first review would be done by them. So that puts a lot of responsibility. And last responsibility is where I have always talked about IMF. The other part is that Pakistan, once you get into an IMF program, should be looking at non-debt creating inflows. And they are one, your remittances, two, your exports, but three, the most important one, which we have been under $2 billion for, the last several years that one sees the data, and that's FDI, the foreign direct investment into the country, for which
Mm.
now we have made a new program and the establishment is fully behind and even pushing that program at the international level. If I put that menu to you and you were the caretaker prime minister in the office, you would definitely say that's an uphill task. By no stretch of imagination, that would be an incorrect statement. And let me just, before you move on, say this, that where we started July on a high note, Pakistan went into the IMF program, and I had always said that anyone can say anything. In the end, it will be an IMF program. Our reserves literally doubled, Sana. We were at $4.5 billion, and we went all the way to $8.7 billion. IMF monies, other monies. There was a euphoria in the market. Market went up by 15-20%. The Pakistan Stock Exchange, the rupee stabilized. But I have to be cautious here. When I see the July numbers, Pakistan's economy has not done well. And that puts the caretakers in a more difficult position to fulfill the 30th September targets. So I am hoping that today's briefing to the PM was an honest one. In a
Yeah.
political government, you can mince your words, but in a caretaker setup with a huge responsibility of carrying the economy through a distressed time period, I hope they told him that exports fell by 9%, remittances fell by 19%, Pakistan's collection on the FBR was 16.7% higher. The IMF promise is 33% higher. So that's the brief picture of where Pakistan stands and what the caretaker needs to do.
Right, absolutely. And Dr. Khaqan, when we take a look at the issue of course, how previously the IMF standby arrangement was going to be divided between three governments, and now it seems that the caretaker setup will be looking after the rest of it so far. But in terms of whether or not this is going to be a positive a move forward or a good development in terms of the impact it will have on the arrangement. I know that you said that this is going to add more responsibility, but does it help the situation also that now the IMF is only going to have to deal with this particular setup till the completion of the program?
Sana, so the quantitative criterias that are to be completed by the 30th of September have to be completed whoever is in power, whether it's caretaker or a political government or any other kind of government. That's
Sure.
the bottom line. The state apparatus has to work together to make sure that on the 30th of September, when we review the targets, everything that was discussed with the fund is met. That is the
Sure.
crucial
But
part to do the
I
November
understand that,
review.
Dr. Khan, but does it help that now it's only the caretaker setup moving forward? Does it help or not?
If you want a very, very honest answer, right from the deep, depth of my heart, the answer is depends what is the caretaker's competition. And that's it. I mean, I cannot be more clear about this. You don't need any to waste any time. Even
Okay.
today, you saw the rupee slip 3 rupees today. That is a first indication. So I'll give you an example. Sana, this is very important. Pitafi sahab, bear me out. Pakistan has said to the IMF that they will not let the rupee difference in the curb market or the official market, the interbank market, to be more than 1.25% for 5 consecutive days. That's a structural benchmark. It's a continuous benchmark. Today, the rupee was almost 4% higher in the curb market than it was in the interbank market. It has been so for the past couple of days. You have to start thinking today what went different, or what you need to do different tomorrow morning. Petrol prices are about to be changed tonight. Both the international prices have gone up, but our rupee has slipped over the last 15 days. It's going to hurt the inflationary levels that we have thought, and more monetary tightening in the offing. So all these things, you need a team today at 8 o'clock to have taken office, which could have reviewed, not only given clear directions on the different things that needed to be done today, but tomorrow, every day, till the caretakers leave the government. That's my honest opinion.
Right, and I totally understand that and value that. Faisal, when we take a look at the situation, of course, we've been talking about the responsibilities that will exist and do exist with regards to what the caretaker setup is dealing with. But I know that for the same reason, the caretaker setup has also been empowered and it is being facilitated in a way as to meet these challenges. But regardless of that, do you think that when we take a look at the economic situation, there was always this conversation before the choice of the PM or before the choice of the caretaker setup, that is going to be an important indicator of moving forward? Do you think that strength is now going to be found with the kind of caretaker setup we have, and the way that this will then define the choices of the cabinet, and what sort of do you think impact will that entail as to the continuity that the PM referred to today?
Dr. Khaqan earlier, Sana, he mentioned something very crucial, and that was related to, obviously, the current setup is not it is a political setup. Of course, they don't have their decisions, they would not be obviously influenced by a political ideology or something. There's only one ideology, and that is obviously the nationalistic approach. Yes, in coming days there will be hurdles, and I mean, we are lucky to have a setup which is empowered setup. Why I say this? Because right before this setup came, of course, a couple of months ago, we started hearing about, obviously, Pakistan wants to attract FDIs, wants to attract FDIs for the agri sector, and agricultural sector obviously will be attracting. And if we talk about the Pakistan's green initiative, of course that would attract FDIs as well. So in that context, of course, we are expecting that in coming future there will be certain decisions which are required to be made, and of course this empowered government will make them decisions. And if we talk about the team which is working with the Prime Minister, of course they are able enough to deal with any situation. But it would be quite tricky to see how things move on in coming future, as Dr. Khaqan earlier rightly pointed out, that the fuel prices, they might go up, and eventually we will see more inflation, and then it would be the time for the government to make tough decisions. It will be quite interesting to see what kind of decisions they come up with. But at the moment, of course, if we talk about Pakistan's foreign remittances, they have reduced, and of course it's been mentioned earlier as well that Pakistan's GDP is shattered as well. So things would go towards positive side with the day and night work, and of course empowered setup can do it. At the moment, of course, along with this economy, of course, they have to make sure that the political forces are calm as well, and they can keep them calm only through one aspect, and that is that if they can assure them that there will not be a strange kind of delay in the elections. Yes, it might prolong for a month or couple of months or whatever, but eventually it would not be a sort of time which can be considered as, oh, it was a very long time before the election took place. So they have to keep everything intact, including the political parties, and I'm hoping that the current setup, with the energies they have, with the youthfulness they have, of course they will be able to deal with it.
Right, and Farrukh, the important aspects of today's meeting were, of course, also in terms of continuing previous policies and then focusing on reforms, particularly in the tax sector, and then also in terms of the SIFC, the importance of being able to use this platform to get in more investment in the country. And of course, while that is something that we all appreciate in terms of how these are important measures that need to be taken for the economic challenges of the country, I want to understand how exactly can this be, or will this be ensured moving forward, especially in terms of the kind of targets or benchmarks that we need to arrive at given the IMF standby arrangement, and whether or not this particular issue will be taken care of by the caretaker setup and can possibly be done so in the kind of limitations that exist.
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question. It is a very good question, but I will mostly try to actually talk about other things because earlier Dr. Khaqan Najeeb has actually flagged two things which are important. First one, I must thank him for flagging that issue. That if there is a difference between, or increasing difference between the interbank rate and then also open market rate, that actually is something that should concern the current government. My own interpretation or understanding is that when it comes to Pakistan's financial bureaucracy, the flex or muscle memory that we have usually actually goes for management of some sort. But because he has also raised the question of absence of finance minister today, so my humble submission is that whenever a new government takes over, it takes the new prime minister a little bit of time to cobble together a team that can be relied on. So that bit is understandable, and I hope in coming 1 or 2 days we will see a finance minister also taking charge, and with that things will start to stabilize, particularly because I'm told that the policy consistency will be ensured and Pakistan's international commitments that were made will also be guaranteed. Now, the reason why we are actually questioning whether those policies can be implemented in the same fashion or not, and if you remember when you and I had interaction with the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, that was the question that came to my mind also. How are you going to guarantee that your commitments are fulfilled? So at that time I didn't get a clear answer, but I think that now we do. One intellectual dishonesty that I've been seeing from coming from Pakistani punditry over the past few days, and I'm talking about political punditry, is particularly regarding the method or the way the current caretaker prime minister was appointed. Somehow media seems to be giving impression that Shehbaz Sharif or Raja Riaz were Manchurian candidates, and all of a sudden they went into a room and a button flicked and immediately they installed an establishment candidate. Let me disabuse everyone of this notion because it is clearly, and I know where the actual suggestion came from. If you'll insist, later in the program I can give you the name as well, but it was essentially a PMLN's decision through and through. For example, Shehbaz Sharif Saab, he is working very closely with Mian Nawaz Sharif's dictates of his instructions. Raja Riaz is also somebody who is going to, join PMLN in coming days. So that was a decision that was taken within ambit of PMLN's own policy makers. And with that, there are two other indicators, Sana, that policy consistency will be continued, especially because we are talking about finance, and finance in previous government's time was essentially with PMLN. So with that appointment in mind, remember what I've been telling you about the role of principal secretary and how important that is and how exactly that defines the role of the government. So the the principal secretary during the previous government, he is going to continue as the principal secretary of this government as well. Chima has also been retained. So it is clear. And when you, the third thing, when you look at the possible names that are being floated for the, cabinet, there are also people who might be in the orbit of PMLN more than anything else. So that would ensure that in coming days, what we are going to see is policy consistency, and that will ensure that all the commitments that were made will be fulfilled. Having said that, do you want me to tell you the name whence the nomination came?
Go ahead.
Mariam Nawaz, I'm told, it was her idea that this caretaker prime minister should be caretaker prime minister. So with that in mind, things are hunky-dory, they are going to be good. But there's a flip side to it as well, and that is political side, because it seems that one partner in the previous arrangement is unhappy, and that is People's Party. So what we have heard is that People's Party, not only when oath taking was taking place, at that time we did not see any People's Party leaders sitting there, and there's a possibility that at this moment they might be actually interpreting this as a power consolidation move. And with that, if they become desperate enough and if they become free agent, they can go anywhere. They can even go to PTI. They can actually try to create a third front. So that is going to be an interesting aspect to see. But at this moment, I think that whosoever was objecting to the candidature of the current Prime Minister, I kept on asking him about his personal attributes, that do you see anything negative? And no one can come up with one singular one.
That is correct. Yeah. And Faisal, I'll come to you, but let me just also get Dr. Khaqan in the discussion, especially in terms of this appointment as well. Dr. Khaqan, the issues with reference to what we've heard from the meeting today that I see is also when we take a look at the kind of emphasis that again is there on reform, that is there in terms of how the FBR needs to do better, how there needs to be more action taken in terms of making sure that there's a lot of improvement in certain sectors. And then, of course, in terms of the policies and the profiles of the people who are going to be taking a look ahead. And while that is great to listen to, but I want to know whether we are going to be lost in trying to achieve such huge targets or such overarching ambitions, and whether or not that is possible in terms of the more immediate and direct roles or tasks, particularly for a government who's here for a limited time, even if it's longer than 3 months. And secondly, I also want your take on how previously we were looking at the aspect of being an economist or somebody with an economic background to be the right candidate for the role of caretaker PM, and that seemed to be quite the buzz previously. And I want to know whether that is a necessary requirement or prerequisite for anybody who's going to have to handle the entire cabinet and make sure that certain decisions are taken and that certain action points are taken when you really know exactly what you have to do.
And Dr. Khaqan, with your permission, third question is a very simple question. As we know right now, of course, we have very robust and very, I must say, energetic kind of leadership in shape of the current caretaker Prime Minister. Of course, the finance minister should be very young one as well with the robust ideas, and we have been obviously listening you since almost 2 years, and we have been listening you on different seminars talking over Pakistan's economy and how can we fix it. You having obviously experience of Australia as well and the West as well, couldn't we see your name as being floated for being our finance minister, sir, interim?
So I'll start with the easier questions first. So the targets. So obviously the most important part is that the targets with the IMF, the targets on keeping the energy sector efficient. That means, the PM took the call on seeing the energy sector boys today. And I hope that they were able to explain to him about the line losses, about the inefficiencies, and in the short term possible that there is enforcement can be done. So as Pitafi Saab was talking on the FPR, they can be pushed. So the pushing means we want to see one thing from the caretaker setup. They cannot go and make new laws. They cannot go and put new taxes. But what they can do, and they should be able to do, is enforcement. This is
Yes.
exactly what I would have done, is to enforce the taxes that are there, to make sure that the targets agreed with the fund monthly are met. And so I think it is 1977 billion, off the top of my head, I remember this figure, that has to be met. And you can have me again after 30th of September, and we'll see if that target is met or not. So what I'm trying to say here is that, Sana, you're absolutely right. But also on the non-debt creating instruments, the discussions that have happened with Saudi Arabia, UAE, to move forward on the kind of investments that they want to do. The Recodic deal in which we are trying to offload is destined for 25th of December. So let's see what happens there. I think it's a very short period of time, but let's see how we move on that. We've moved PIA on the list of privatization, 100 billion rupee loss last year. Um, I I'm perturbed when I hear that figure. 700 billion rupee loss overall. And I am not giving that figure. The last finance minister on the floor of the House told us that this was the difficulty in running PIA today. So, yes, all these targets. So, I think the caretaker prime minister, if I was advising him, what should have on his table, and he should see this many times a day, that these are my targets for 30th September. These are the targets for December that I've agreed on the energy efficiencies, and that's all that he should be meeting. And that's all his job should be. His job should be able to dribble and make sure that this goal that I've told you, 28.4 billion dollars over the 12 months, and by the time they're leaving in March, most of the monies should be, in the kitty. So that $9 billion in Geneva, that's my target. The monies that we have seen on the program loans that are still there, $1 billion or so. So, this is the kind of talk he should have every morning with his finance minister. Now, the
Right.
second part, should caretaker PM be economist?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think a caretaker PM should be the guy who has a solid handle on statecraft. And statecraft today is economic diplomacy. Statecraft today is, of course, diplomacy from the Foreign Office. It is, of course, moving along all the political parties because you have to move into an election. An economist might find that difficult to do. That role may better be suited to a caretaker, non economist, or a political figure or inclined towards politics. On your
Right.
last part,
And the last part.
and the last part. So, friends like you are always there to support friends like us. And one day, inshallah, one wants to come back and help. But I really think that time has come where we should take the basic calls now. It cannot be that we don't do the IMF programs. So, whoever you want to have as caretaker finance minister, I used to have on my speed dial all the key ministers when I was running the IMF program, because I used to give them a call and no paperwork, and tell them that this is what we've discussed in Dubai and this is how we will move with it. And so prepare the summaries. When we came back, we had everything. We gave ECC approval. Not a single review incomplete in the 12 reviews that we did. And I think that's the kind of empowerment one would need to do this kind of thing. And hopefully someday one should be able to come back and help.
Absolutely, and
Excellent.
your friends are with you, Dr. Khaqan. Thank you very much
Absolutely.
for being part of
Thank
the
you.
debate and joining us in this discussion. Farrukh, when we take a look at especially the part where the enforcement is extremely important, that is something that I want to explore further, because I understand that the caretaker setup has been empowered, but is it empowered enough for the people to take it more seriously, and seriously enough that the measures that need to be enforced are there, or is it a matter of certain legalities that perhaps need to be there, or has that already been met? How will this caretaker setup, in fact, be able to enforce what it meant to?
Right, Sana, and that is important to understand. Regarding the targets, for example, when it comes to doing away with subsidies or raising the prices, particularly when you talk about power sector and elsewhere, I think that is easier than anything else, because there all you have to do is remove something that you had actually introduced, the government of Pakistan had introduced, and you can phase it out, right? Regarding tax collection and the targets of tax, that is something that will still have to wait and see how the next finance minister takes over, and he actually, or she for that matter, actually empowers or supports FBR, because FBR has been doing stellar work, but still, because documentation is an issue, that continues to be a problem. And there was an attempt to bring in traders during Miftah's ministry. At that time, there were attempts to bring trader community into the tax net as well, and that actually backfired royally. With that kind of a situation, of course, we still have to see how much the next finance minister will allow political considerations to influence their decision, right? Having said that, there are two very interesting challenges that the caretakers might face. One is the Supreme Court of Pakistan. We have seen that it seems to be playing a strategic game. It kept on waiting regarding its own curtailment or suo motu powers. At that time, we saw that Supreme Court did not release the judgment till the time the assembly had packed up and gone. So with that kind of a situation, there's always a possibility that matters may end up with Supreme Court, and they might actually cause some consternation, especially in the current month, 1 month between now and the middle of September, till the time the current, current CJ, Chief Justice of Pakistan, retires. And then, of course, there's the matter of Pakistan's president also. He also retires in September, or at least that is the time when his term expires. And today, if you have noticed, he has sent back 13 bills that were passed by the parliament back to parliament, which half of which does not exist anymore, right? He has said that, as he uses the term colorable, that many of them are colorable, or they need some kind of review. So Senate is there, but I don't think Senate will be able to fill in the shoes of the National Assembly. So what happens to those 13 laws? So empowerment is there, but when it comes to the enforcement, that depends on how cooperative the bureaucracy is, how focused the government is, and how much political side is also supporting the ideas or reforms that are there.
Right, absolutely, and these are important aspects that we will be, of course, exploring as the days evolve. We're also going to be taking a look, of course, in our second segment at the 77 years of oppression in India. And before we start our discussion, we're going to take a look at the small package prepared by our team.
Since taking office in 2014, Modi's BJP has implemented a number of laws and other policies that have legalized discrimination against religious minorities, encouraged aggressive Hindu nationalism, and demonized anyone who opposed it. With independent institutions like the media and the judiciary being compromised by prejudices ingrained in the current Hindu nationalist BJP administration, nationalist organizations are now free to harass, threaten, and assault religious minorities with impunity. In December 2019, the government approved a discriminatory citizenship law that for the first time bases citizenship on religion and targets Muslims. The first national register of citizenship, which left over 2 million people, primarily Muslims, stateless, was followed by the passage of Citizenship Amendment Act. Majority of those who were left out of the register had migrated from then East Pakistan in 1971. Such measures are against both Indian domestic law and the obligations that India has under international human rights law, which forbids discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, or religion, and mandates that government give citizens equal protection under the law. In UP, individuals accused of illegal cow slaughter have been subject to the National Security Act, a restrictive regulation that allows incarceration without trial for up to 1 year. The Uttar Pradesh government detained at least 4,000 people in 2020 on suspicion of cow slaughter in violation of the statute prohibiting it, and brought 76 people before court under the National Security Act. The rights to freedom of speech and opinion have not been sufficiently protected by courts in various instances when police have detained Muslims based on bogus charges brought by Hindu nationalist organizations. By pursuing bogus charges against them for holding opposing opinions, participating in protests, or covering events, the police have continued to harass activists, journalists, and government critics.
Well, of course, we've seen many years, of course, of oppression within India, and so many measures taken which have negatively impacted minorities, especially Muslims, and huge human rights violations that unfortunately haven't been met with any sort of consequence. And Faisal, when we take a look back at these 77 years, I want to know whether or not you see any particular decline or any particular period in which you can say that that was where things have significantly gone down, and why would that be?
Sana, 15th of August 1947, that was the moment when India, of course, India we know that came into being, but with time, slowly and gradually, it turned itself firstly into Hindustan, and then today, of date, we know that it is not even Hindustan, it is Hindutwastan. But how things changed and when things changed, I think things started changing the very moment when Gandhi, their leader, the one who was pivotal in obviously taking the independence for people of India, he was murdered in daylight by Nathuram Godse. Nathuram Godse was a lifelong member of RSS. And in today's India, RSS is ruling today's India. That is why I'm saying it is Hindutwastan. The moment Gandhi, who believed in secular India, died, that was the moment when the decline started. There were so many incidents which we can count on, which we can talk about, on Sikhism, on Christianity, on Muslims, minorities. Day and night, they were obviously, victims of at the hands of extremism of Hindu, which is called Hindutva. And in today's time, of course, that repression against the minorities, it has increased rather than decreasing itself. In today's India, we don't see secularism at all. In today's India, what we see is that bills which are being brought from BJP's government with the help of RSS ideology, them bills are entirely against the minorities. It feels as if discrimination in India is legitimized, it's legalized, oppression is legitimized, it is legalized. In today's India, we can only see legalized oppression and nothing else. And minorities, if we talk about them, of course, one of their own foreign minister, I'm talking about Swami Subramaniam, when he was talking to one of premier media outlets of the world, and what he said about that Muslims, only the equal citizens of India have the equal rights.
Yeah.
And when he was asked, what about the Muslims, are they not equal citizens? And then he said, no, they are not equal citizens. So this is what I'm trying to say. Today's India is not secular, and the decline is so grief that in today's India, Muslims, they are just trying to find themselves, where do they stand.
Right, and I understand that, Faisal, but in response to what I asked earlier, I want to know whether you see any particular time period in this history where this shift started, or do you mean to say that it goes back to 1947?
It goes back to 1947,
okay.
But of course, there were incidents like I'm talking about Golden Temple incident of 1984, where Sikhs were butchered, and then we know about Gujarat incident where Muslims were butchered, and in last year we saw churches were torched. A year before that, we saw churches were torched in India, and today we once again are seeing that the dwellings and the places which are known for Muslim majority, they are being bulldozed. Their houses are being bulldozed. Their businesses, they are being torched day and night. I mean, brutalities are taking place against the Muslims. A day before yesterday, the latest one in Assam, one of the Muslim, I think Hifzur Rahman, he got lynched to death by the cow vigilantes. And this is today's India we're talking about. And of course,
Right.
with the help of RSS, BJP took power and Modi took the office. Once who was known for being Butcher of Gujarat,
And
he suddenly became Prime Minister of India, and that's when it went out of the roof.
Absolutely, and I understand what you mean. But Farrukh, we've of course seen the previous 77 years. But what do you see in the next 77 years? Do you think that those will be better, worse, or the same?
Oh goodness, that is such a big question. I'm not a seer, and for some reason I was feeling that I'm shrinking on the screen also. But regarding what Faisal was saying, I want to actually, with the help of the safe facts, I'm going to actually try to divine future. But I want to actually disagree on most of the propositions that our friend Faisal actually came up with. Number one, Gandhi was never secular, right? He actively practiced Hindu religion, and I think that also was there. That is not to say that his heart was not in the right place. I think he was protesting for Pakistan before he was murdered. So that is something that is very interesting. But having said that, you have to look at what is wrong with India structurally. And you have to actually go back to intellectuals like Aisha Jalal to understand what might be going wrong in India. Aisha Jalal's argument is that the creation of Pakistan was essentially a reaction or a consequence of the centralist impulse in India, where you try to centralize power, and then India's federalism. In India, India is known to have layered sovereignties, right? When you had kings at that time also, or emperors for that matter, there were divans or local princes who actually controlled the exercise power, and they continued. All they had to do was to pay tribute to the federal government or central government. But that was when Nehru actually decided that if the two provinces that are Punjab, United Punjab, and Muslim majority Bengal, if they are not divided, and hence those parts actually don't fall apart, till that time he will never have a centralized government. So essentially what you see it right now in India is a colonial state, not post-colonial. It is the colonial state that was created by the British, and that continues to perpetuate itself. Now this idea of dividing Punjab and Bengal actually came from not from Congress originally, but Hindu Mahasabha. Hindu Mahasabha, Godse was mentioned, so Godse was member of Hindu Mahasabha. And Hindu Mahasabha is a precursor of RSS, and there is an ideological name associated with it as well. Some actually believe that there was some relationship between Godse and Savarkar, who was actually the initiator of the whole idea. So right now, what I see is, what you see is, end of hypocrisy. Indian state was actually using religion actively throughout its tenure, especially during Congress's time. They called it soft Hindutva. And they kept on persecuting people, but they would go publicly out and say that we are with the minority. Because the consequences are such that eventually consolidation had to come to somebody who is using name of religion and who is also trying to build a centralized India. So Narendra Modi is there. He might be many things, but he is not a hypocrite, right? At least compared to what Congress is. And unfortunately, because that trend will continue, and there is so much changes that have come in India, they have changed the DNA of India in past 10 years. So what I see is that it is going to be a journey of pain, and it is going to become Mahabharata or Bharat, not even Hindustan. And there they are going to have consolidation of power at the expense of minorities, especially because they are baited, so that India's Hindu-led society can be consolidated. It is called Hindu consolidation, and it will continue, unfortunately, because India has deep pockets and influence. The entire world goes blind when it comes to these massive abuse of power in India.
Right, and that of course is very tragic and unfortunate that that is what we're going to see in the future. But thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us and talking to us in detail, of course, regarding the situation of the economic challenges in Pakistan, and then, of course, the past 77 years that we have seen in India and how the situation has worsened. And we can, of course, hope for the best, but we haven't really seen any indication of that coming forward. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow with more news.